So welcome everyone to Legal Tech Talks. My name's Frances Anderson. I'm the Managing Director of Net Law Media. So today I'm delighted to welcome an insightful and highly time-relevant panel where we're going to be discussing the future Reinvented, Reimagining, Cybersecurity and the legal sector, which will be moderated by Jane Frankland. Now, Jane is the owner and CEO of Cybersecurity Capital, an award-winning entrepreneur, international speaker and best-selling author. She focuses on business strategy and high performance and is a world authority on attracting and retaining women in cybersecurity. She has been named as the third most influential person in cybersecurity in the UK and a top 20 global influencer. Now, before I hand over to Jane, who will introduce the panel today and outline the agenda for you all, I'd like to go through some basic housekeeping. So this session is going to last about an hour, depending upon the questions which come through from you all. So it may go just over. What I want you to do is, if you'd like to join and ask a question live to the panelists, then please do. You'll be able to click on your name and basically ask a question. A hand will be raised in blue. I will see that. And what we will do is we will pull you in nearer to the end. So about 4:45, I would say. Or alternatively, you can pose a question anonymously or with your own name through the Q&A at the bottom or through the chat function, which I will be monitoring and then working with Jane to make sure that your questions are heard and answered by all of the panelists here today. So now, without further ado, Jane, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Frances. Listen, I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to be joined by some incredible panelists. We have got Lisa Forte, a partner at Red Goat Cybersecurity. We've got Cashman, principal engineer at McAfee. We've got Karl Knowles, the global head of cyber for HFW. And we've got Ayala, Ples, customer success executive at Tessian. Now, I've got a whole range of questions that I'm going to run through with the panelists. What I want you to do, Frances alluded to it a few minutes ago, but what I want you to do is really participate full out in this. We've got we've got so many participants joining us today, and the best way for you to really get the most out of this is by asking questions. So please stick them in the chat box. We're going to be looking for those. There's going to be an opportunity for you to get them answered and to get lots and lots of insight from this. So I'm going to get stuck into the questions that I've got. Now, what we've seen in 2020 already is we've seen a lot of changes. We're seeing a lot of resets and reinventions, and established law firms are facing an absolutely perfect storm of pressures from clients, employees, suppliers, and competitors. So what I want to ask Karl, I'm going to start with you actually. Can you talk to us about what you're seeing? I'm particularly interested to find out if you're seeing any special attacks that are going on, or any trends, or anything that is particularly unique to the legal sector.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, so obviously since this is all started, we've seen a huge rise, and this is across the board on attacks, and these are your standard kind of phishing attacks, much more crafted around COVID, and quite honestly, it's a lot of them are easy to spot, but actually, moreover, they are becoming more and more difficult. And we are certainly seeing, an uplift on that. Certainly from the reports that we receive from our kind of inbound mail protection system, Mimecast, it does flag up an awful lot of malicious email that's getting blocked. Unfortunately, some email does still get through. And also what we're seeing is attempts to intercept sort of payment requests, because obviously we've moved, from a physical environment where the norm was the norm to a much more digitized environment. So all of a sudden we're quite vulnerable in aspects, such as payment that we were never vulnerable before, and a lot of other things.
What about something that you've spoken to me about, which I'm quite interested in, is is really kind of to do with the behavior change. So take, for instance, when we've had a conversation before, you've spoken about the legal community and fee earners really enjoying printing off lots of paper. And obviously we're all working remotely now, we're working from home, we're not in that office environment. Can you talk to me about kind of the risks that are associated with that and the changes that you're seeing, which I'm particularly interested as a result?
Yeah, sure. So printing's one of the sort of expected norms of being back in the office. And one thing we saw immediately as we moved into this remote working environment was the requirement for printing to continue. One thing that hadn't been thought of at the time was how we were going to allow fee earners access to printing. And we soon realized that as soon as you block printers or printing in general, what you'll see is an increase in data loss from your networks. So they will tend to look at other ways of printing. So it was, we immediately thought, well, actually, we need to do stuff differently. We're seeing the implementation, for example, of DocuSign coming in much faster than it would have done, purely to reduce the need for printing, the old requirement for a wet signature, for example. And what we've had to do as well on that is we've had to push out guidance on how to print safely and what's expected of them, because you can get into the situation if you're not too careful that there's going to be an uncontrolled amount of data that's printed. You've no longer got sight of it. It's another area which could be a vulnerability. They may be unable to destroy it correctly, or it might just end up in the normal recycling and go out with the normal rubbish if you're not too careful. So we've had to we give guidance on that to make sure that they understand that the importance of that. Actually, where practical, saying to them, look, just keep it, and we'll get it back to the office. We'll either send couriers out to you to collect it, or we ask that when you return to office that you bring it back with you. So it's all about, I guess, that change of behaviour and educating them that actually, we're not stopping you from doing this because we still want you to do. How about you do it slightly differently? And how about you try and be more paperless? And one thing I will add as well is that through our Cyber Champion scheme, I managed to get a really good article written by one of our partners over in Australia that runs an entirely paperless office and practice. And we've done an article on our local intranet about the successes of that to really drive that initiative forward, so we can reduce the requirement for printing. And it's had some real good feedback, particularly within our shipping industry area.
Incredible. That's absolutely amazing. What about Ayala? What are you seeing, from the customers that you're interacting with? I know you do a lot of work on, say, security culture and things like that. Are you seeing anything particular?
Yeah. So I think to draw on Karl's remarks around people being used to using paper, so printing out a lot and maybe even just reviewing contracts and making marks by pen, and that potentially posing more risk at home. What we've seen with Tessian is that although technology won't completely solve the issue of creating a security culture around the firm, it can really help. And the way in which I've worked with customers to help with technology is to introduce warnings that would recognize when people send sensitive information to personal accounts sometimes. And we've seen that happen because people may not be as accustomed to using their remote desktop, or potentially their firm has initially blocked them from being able to print on their home printer. So those are, I guess, a variety of barriers that firms initially didn't foresee would actually cause data to be sent to personal accounts. So with my work with customers, we're launching these continuous warnings that are referring to the company's privacy policy and just reminding people in the moment, in the act, that what they're doing will actually pose the client's data at risk, but also the firm's data. And I find that those kind of continuous warnings that are only relevant coming up in the relevant moment are seen quite favorably and can permeate really across all levels at the firm.
So do you think there's an appetite for it now? Because, you know, when we certainly went into this rapid reset, so COVID-19 has done that. You know, we knew these changes were coming. You know, we knew that they were coming over the next 3 to 5 years or decade even. We just didn't expect them to come overnight, which is what COVID-19 has forced us to do. We're all working remotely now in a different way. Do you think it's given us that opportunity to actually do things the right way and reset and push that message across firms, actually, in terms of we're not the weakest link, you know, people aren't the weakest link, there's an opportunity for you now, we operate ennobling culture and so forth. What's your view on that?
Absolutely. I think what I see with my customers is that they want to empower their fee earners and employees to make the right decision rather than monitor what they do and then catch them out. So it's about, I guess, making people feel that they're using the really important information that they have for their clients and for their firm responsibly. So what we've seen with customers that have been using these warnings is that people have decreased the number of emails they send to personal accounts. And
that's good.
Yeah, so that might be because internal policy has changed. So potentially some firms now allow people to print on personal printers, but now have a policy around proving the destruction of certain documents that have now been used at home. Yeah. While others may have, as Karl said, moved to using DocuSign, so remove the extra hurdle that existed with contract execution and review and digitizing that. So I think technology can both empower people in the moment that they're making use of sensitive information to know what the right decision should be. But at the same time, it can empower security and compliance teams to realize what the gaps are in existing infrastructure, and then maybe take proposals to the board and introduce new technology that would help.
Yeah, so that, for me, I see that as such an opportunity. So it's almost like a gift, you know, really, this opportunity that we've been given. Lisa, can I talk to you about security champions and still kind of like looking at the theme of culture, because it's so important these days, you know, with the numbers of attacks, you know, that are happening, and also potentially with, you know, again, with the situation in terms of the environment, in terms of the economy, you know, we are going to go into a recession. We will most likely go into a depression. And when you have things like this going on with the economies, then we usually see more cybercrime and criminal activity going on externally and internally. What is your view on how we deal with this, you know, from that culture perspective, from creating security champion groups, you know, within firms?
I think one of the key things really to look at is that there needs to be a baseline of awareness for sure within the organization. However, I do think that there are certain groups of individuals who might be classed as high risk, not because they're not sort of assessing their level of competence, but just purely because of the data that they handle. For example, someone who works in an intellectual property team or in a mergers and acquisitions team is going to have incredibly commercially sensitive data. And as you alluded to, in these economic times that we find ourselves, that's potentially some sort of, you know, market influence that could happen there. So it's not just the people who have access to the personal data, it's also commercially sensitive information that in these times could be incredibly valuable to attackers who want to sell some sort of intellectual property or R&D that's not yet protected.
Mo, what's your view? What are you seeing from your perspective with the work that you're doing?
From a threat perspective, today, I think we certainly see, you know, how the, you know, attackers have adapted, you know, quite a bit in the COVID landscape, taking advantage of, as Karl said. What we've noticed was and it seems to happen, you know, whenever we have a new situation, right? It's we always forget sort of the basics, right? And hygiene, security hygiene, for example, maybe the way I describe it, And attackers don't forget that, right? Those that do that, they take advantage of that. So from our research, we've seen that you're taking advantage of things like remote desktop. I think Lisa, you mentioned that. Remote desktop protocol, for example, to deploy ransomware. And you think about, how do you respond to that in a remote situation? It's not that easy.
Yeah.
How do you get a new computer out there? How do you recover the data? So those things, attackers take advantage of those situations. We've seen that sort of go through the roof in terms of targeting remote users in particular during this time frame. But I think even on the data loss side, though, I think internally we would say the same thing, increase in sort of DLP related, events and things, because, I always think, the users are part of the solution, right? And they just want to get the job done, right? And if security makes it harder, naturally they got to do something. So we have to make it easier for our users in particular.
Okay, that kind of makes me think of shadow IT and things like this. And, certainly from a lot of the other work that, I've been doing, I know that the number of tools that we are switching between, on a daily basis is just going through the roof. I think the average number is 35. And of course, from our perspective, with this situation that's going on, the number of tools that are being used, shadow IT, teams just wanting to get on and do their work in a very challenging environment. But obviously for us, it's just like, well, that means, 35 security policies, 35 support, issues, and obviously training and things like that wrapped around it, which again comes into that whole culture. Are you seeing firms handle this in a different way? I'm going to bring this back actually to Karl. Are you seeing firms handle this, or your firm handle this in a different way? Are you seeing more of an appetite for training, in the firm?
Well, firstly, listen, it's always about awareness and crikey, if you don't allow somebody to perform their task, going back to what you say, they will find a way around it. I mean, video conferencing, for example, how many different video conferencing apps do we have now? When courts are saying we can only use this one, and clients are saying we can only use this one, and you kind of lose control of it. And of course, nobody wants to use Zoom because of the stories that initially got pushed out on that. So my thing is about pushing awareness out. It's firstly getting them to understand, where they sit in this and where and how they can help, and empower them to be the first line of defense and to be part of the solution, not the problem. That is, and what I done as soon as I arrived to HFW, as we previously discussed, we set up an HFW cyber champions group straight away, because for me, I'm going to be considered as the bad guy pushing out all this policy that's preventing them or restricting them from being able to conduct their business. So what I need to do is I need to bring the business and business services on board with me as I come up with all these initiatives. But I need these champions to speak up for me as well in a language that's understood by their particular areas. And that's really important. So, if we are going to enforce stop printing, for example, or enforce use of certain applications for doing certain things, it's not going to be popular across the board. But what it will do, if you get the right messages across and you get the right people behind you, it can be, well, okay, yeah, we understand it. We don't like it. We'd prefer to use WhatsApp, but we understand why.
Yes.
And we understand the importance because you've told us about it. And that does work. I think it's about getting, as I like to call them, friendly forces behind you.
But he's also about being not just the ambassador, having these successful champion focus groups, but actually being a really effective communicator and getting that buy-in. So it's that whole influencer aspect, isn't it? So
that's right.
Positioning and marketing and effectively using those soft skills, like now more than ever, to bring all this thing together. Because like I said at the beginning, this is an opportunity for us to actually almost like go back to the basics, go back to the foundations and do the basics really well. Because if we do that, then actually we're going to do a better job of securing environments and reducing risk.
That's right, Jane. And it's about actually pulling the right levers, finding the right people in the business to speak to and getting them on board. And that's why it's really important for me when I arrived at HFW to speak to all the industry group leads and all the business services leads, because to get their buy-in and to tell you actually what you're trying to achieve. And if you pull the right levers, get the right people on board, it can really help.
So I'm going to bring Lisa in now, because when we've had a conversation, we've spoken about really getting that buy-in from the top, because if you don't get the buy-in from the top, you're fighting a losing battle. You know, you can't work from the position of security leader up and down. You've got to get that buy-in from the top and it filter throughout the whole company. When you are pitching this to leaders, Lisa, you have used different language and wrapped around it so that you get that partner involvement, so that they do come and they do show up. So that, can you talk to us about how you're doing that? What's been effective?
So I think the key thing is to acknowledge that people see their roles within the organization as different. And in my experience, partners or CEOs, C-suite individuals, see themselves at the top of the organization and, you know, rightfully or wrongfully have worked their, way up and see themselves as the kings, essentially, of kingdoms. And I think you can fight against that, and you can try and say, oh, everyone's got to do the same course and so on and so forth. But you might not get a very good reception from that. So what I found really worked is that to sort of pitch it as an executive level course. The threats are ever so slightly different for the executives as they to the other people in the organization. So there can be some bespoke tailoring as well. But essentially pitching it at the right level, it's essentially a marketing campaign. And I think you've got to see putting your awareness campaign, putting these sorts of things forward as you would if you were pitching a product to the wider world. As you know, Jane, with business, you've got to think, who's my audience? What's going to appeal to them? How do I get them to buy into this? And then launch it as you would a marketing campaign, instead of seeing it as just, this is mandatory and I can just make them do it, because you just won't get the engagement.
Absolutely. So this is another opportunity for us to shift. So often what I'll talk about is actually see things through their lens. Don't go out and say, no, this is how you must be, how we're to do it. Actually seek to understand their world, and what's going on for them. And then I find when you do that and you almost like have this PhD in their problems, their challenges and aspirations and things like that, they're much more receptive. So it really is about being very good at, yes, influencing them, but actually coming down to the people skills. You need them to buy into you. You've got to be that magnet. You've got to be that bridge. So instead of, having the stick and literally beating them with it, because obviously I'm talking figuratively, but this is, I think, where we've gone wrong in security. We've gone out, we've got lots of passionate people out there, championing the cause and things like that, and being frustrated, when they don't get it, when others in the company don't get it. And I think really it's about shifting and switching and resetting, and doing what we know we need to do. It's now time. We've got that opportunity to do it.
I think you've got to also appreciate that if something hasn't worked, then you have to appreciate, this hasn't worked, I need to do it differently. Instead of thinking, I'm just going to roll the same thing out again and try again, because that's not how it works in business, and I don't think it works internally for awareness either. So you've got to change that approach.
Completely agree. So this is, for me, when I talk about this is actually sticking your engineer's hat on. So we can design things. There are times when we have to go out there and stick our designer and creative and innovative hat on, but we must always be testing. We've got to be that engineer and have that engineer's mindset. It's just like, what is working, and have that attention. Measure it. Often what I see going on in the industry, and I'd really like your view on this, Ayala, is that we wait for permission. Often we don't have that autonomy necessarily. And I think this again comes down to the culture that we're operating, this fear of, well, what if I do get it wrong? Is it going to be me being axed? Is it me being held accountable? So it comes down to this culture and actually taking the initiative. And certainly we've seen this with other attacks. So, Mo, you spoke about ransomware and the increase of ransomware that we're seeing. You know, we've seen, you know, during the past few months, and also the complexity of it increasing as well. But we've seen with some of the attacks, I'm thinking of Marisk, you know, for example, a few years back. You know, one of the reasons that they were so successful with how they dealt with, you know, the cyber attack was actually because they had this this culture where the CISO said to his team, you know, do what's right for the customer. Mm-hmm. You know, so they weren't waiting for the permission. They were they had that autonomy. They could take those steps in order to reduce the risk and actually be much more resilient and get back to business faster. Ayala, what's your thinking on all of this?
Yeah, I know we've been talking about how to engage people from all levels of the business. One way I've seen managing partners and partners really become engaged with cybersecurity recently is by virtue of certain impersonations within the business that were emails that were purporting to be from the managing partner, targeting very specific fee earners working for the conveyancing department, for example.
Yeah.
Especially now as we've seen an increase in transactions happening there. So initially it kind of fell on the managing partner or on other members of the team to compose some kind of guidance and send that out to the firm. So I think where reputation, but also workload of these members of the business are at stake, then they're quite happy to become involved and find a solution. And beyond kind of impersonation of managing partners, going back to services like DocuSign, for example, we've seen attackers leverage the fact that they know more law firms will be using DocuSign nowadays to digitize contract management. So they've been impersonating DocuSign and trying to either gather certain information or even funds from law firms. And it's, I think, where a software that's so widely used within the business that gets involved as and affects kind of almost anyone within the business, that people are happy to give their buy-in and find a solution.
Really interesting, massively interesting. Mo, I'm gonna come back to you now because I want you to kind of talk to me about this security by design. And I really want to kind of explore this the emphasis on the user experience. So again, it's kind of looking at how we're pitching this, how we are approaching the business, you know, the stakeholders, and getting that buy-in. Because what I'm seeing is, particularly now with the youngsters, I feel so old saying that, but you know, with the millennials especially, and we've got centennials coming as well, but the millennials, there's such an appetite for them to have this whole user experience. And certainly for us, when we're resetting and getting things right and coming back to the innovation aspect, we really need to be approaching it, you know, in this manner. You know, you're an engineer. Can you talk to us about this?
Yeah, I love that aspect. I was on a strategy conversation with a customer a few weeks back, and that topic came up, and I was like, that's it, right? You're thinking from the user perspective, and I think what it is there's a couple of key things in maybe no particular order really, but one is about self-service. And you know, I'm fortunate. I have a very multicultural, multi-generational team, right? And it's really, I think it's really great, you know, in terms of the diversity of things, but also the learning aspect, right? Because I see those elements happening in my own team. You know, self-service. They want to do it themselves, right? And I think it goes back to also we've had a theme throughout here where, you know, stop making security separate, make it part of a flow, right? Not make it complex and technically obtuse, but more in the natural language of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think it particularly that self-service is one of those things there where I want to be able to improve my own maturity, or I want to be able to make the right decision if I'm the user. So give them either through analytics on the backside or learning, you know, on the backside, where they're able to make good decisions through a self-service mechanism, whether that's for data protection, which is one of the more obvious ones, but even more so now in helping customers grow maturity and understand their architecture, Don't make it complicated, like you have to go through a million checklists to find out where you are. Make it pretty easy, right? And we've seen that sort of have a good impact on behavior change, right? So those two areas really come together: the natural workflow, building in security in the natural workflows, and that self-service aspect. I see that all the time, both in my own team as well as with in the products that we're trying to bring to market, as well as our customers. Mm-hmm.
That's really encouraging. So the speed, which kind of like plays into, if we've got the flow, then we've got the speed, and we need that speed. We need that agility, which actually makes me want to talk to Lisa now, because Lisa, when we've spoken, you've said something which I find absolutely fascinating. So we've spoken about efficiency, and you've said efficiency is brittle. Can you talk to our audience about this and what you mean by it and what we need to do in order to improve things?
Yeah, I think brittle, it actually came out of a bit of a mistake, but I think it works because I think efficiency, the process is such that everything works in order and everything works in its certain way. But as soon as you get a disruptive event, anything, whether that's the virus, whether that's a cyber attack, whether that's a power outage, suddenly that whole process breaks down, and you then don't have another way around it, because an efficient process is one that doesn't need much interference, human interference potentially. It's very slick. It works very, very well, provided everything is in order. Now, let's look at Knowles Hydro for a second. They had a cyber attack, and I think what is really good to learn from that case is the reason it wasn't catastrophic, which it should have been, was because the floor managers didn't like using IT. So every week they would print off the production list. That is not an efficient process at all, to print it off and use it and have it, sort of written down. But when all the systems were down, it meant that they could continue with the aluminium production that they were embarking on. So I think sometimes our focus on everything being efficient and monitoring efficiency and making sure everything's working perfectly, I think actually it's a bit of a downfall. And I think the one thing this virus has done is taken a bright highlighter to the things that we've sort of taken for granted.
It's really interesting because, again, you've said to me adaptability trumps efficiency, which is really kind of what you're saying now, but it's also actually not applying almost like a formula to this. And this is where we need good thinking. We need that psychological safety. We need the creativity, the diversity of experience, and so on, thinking. But with this, it's almost like, so coming back to Karl, right at the very beginning, when I asked, what are you seeing, what attacks or changes or trends or behavior changes that you're seeing, one of the things was printing. So it's almost like we have this, and this is where I think, we need the intelligence, the good thinking, where we actually look at it, not in isolation, but actually make a decision based on risk, which is what we should be doing anyway. But here we have, this story of Knowles Hydro, how it was saved effectively, from bankruptcy, because it had these old principles that were going on of like printing out and that saved them. But now we've got a situation where there is that encouragement or even non-allowance of printing out, because we're working remotely. So it's almost like we've got this tension, isn't it? Well, what do we do? Because we know that things like this can actually save us, and we need that redundancy. This comes down to business continuity, doesn't it? Effectively, good old-fashioned business continuity, which has security, plugged into it.
And the sad thing about or it can be seen as sad about efficiency, is that efficiency is often is born to the fact that organisations need to save money. So they want to be more efficient in their process. And, the example Lisa gave there of somebody printing out probably didn't look too favourable, because that printed out would have cost money. What they didn't foresee is that printing out would actually save the organisation. And so whenever we're driven to reduce costs, and to make profits, we all need to really consider what the impact of that would be. And business continuity is a cracking example of that. You know, a system goes down, a computer system goes down, and a manual workaround needs to happen. That manual workaround won't start unless there's some system or process in place to kick that off. When the NHS got attacked, they had to do prescriptions. I remember going to have to collect a prescription, and prescriptions have traditionally been done on the system. Or they didn't have anything to revert on, so they had to do prescriptions in retrospect because they didn't have the system in place to do it, because they'd been that tied into efficiencies of doing everything on computers. They were unable to write a prescription with a pen and sign it off. So mainly because of cost, I'm pretty sure that's what it would have been. You know, but so whenever we're considering anything with business continuity, we've got to keep in mind that, yes, you know, whilst we're at business as usual, we want to be as efficient as possible. But we've got to be able to put money, I guess, aside, or resources aside for the so what, the if, because it's, you know, many commentators I've heard say it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So let's be more, you know, let's embrace it more, and let's, you know, sort of own the problem and say, actually, you know, rather than stopping printing off, why do you do that? Oh, it's in case the computer system breaks down. Oh, okay, then let's just talk through that process, understand what it means and what would happen if it, you know, and it, you know, if you go through the business impact analysis, you know, properly, and you understand the end-to-end process, you can actually see there was a good reason that they printed that stuff out. And, you know, and it just so happens that in that instance, it was just by, you know, by the sounds of it, and I haven't read into it, just by pure luck.
So is this, I mean, okay, right, fine, you've explained that. Ayala, what more can we do? You know, is it a case of we need to improve this with better processes, with us going out and actually not being so siloed and working together collaboratively? Is it that we need to do more training? What do we need to do?
I think you make a really good point about breaking down silos and bringing teams closer together. Yeah. What I've seen with law firms that I work with is that traditionally IT and security teams were working amongst themselves. Then there was the compliance teams kind of working separately, reporting breaches whenever relevant, and then potentially the management team. What I've seen, I guess, since March is that especially compliance and security teams are working a lot more closely together. So compliance have the perspective of the kind of data loss and breaches that they've had to report, and they can then work together with the security team to decide what tools would be most effective for the business. On the other hand, looking, I guess, at fee earners, I think client expectations have changed with regards to the security measures that law firms introduce. And I've seen an example with a construction company, for example, that initially suffered a accidental data loss breach and was going to be removed from a tender process, but then went out and implemented necessary measures that put it at a much better kind of light than the other competing firms. So I think where the people working directly with clients have an understanding that if they kind of follow certain behaviors and comply with the security and compliance teams, then their own clients will continue coming back and working together, and it puts them in a great light.
So that's really interesting. Mo, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more collaboration? Because say, for me, I'm a big fan of collaboration. I'm a big fan obviously of diversity in all its forms. And I think, again, when we come back to like how we can improve, how we can get better decision making around risk, how we can innovate better and be more creative and adaptable and agile and resilient and all of this, it's through having the diversity, through collaborating with different types of people, men and women and young and old, and all of that, neurodiverse people, all forms of diversity. Yeah. I know I'm not spoken about all of them, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, a couple of that, and I love the theme of resilience, because to me, culture, leadership, architecture, and architecture in a broad sense of things are all key pillars of that, right? And so when it comes to things like the cultural diversity, team diversity, organizational diversity, capability, diversity, even. Yeah. I was doing just a thought exercise a couple days ago in preparation here, and I thought back in the teams that I led, and the ones that really rise to the top were the ones that were multicultural, multi-gender, multi-generational, even the most innovative teams. Put it that way, right? And I don't have a statistic to say that, but it's just my gut feeling, right? And I see that even today. The leadership piece there is also very important. Leadership at all levels, right? So adaptability, empowering that adaptability is a key thing, but the leadership has to be hands off as well, right? Hands off, but eyes, as somebody might say, eyes on, but hands off, right? And leading like a gardener might be the right terminology there, and growing those elements within your team to be the best, right? Or to be, to grow, let's just say, and understand their mission, which is a key thing. And we've certainly seen in the industry partnerships with organizations and businesses, being much more, mission oriented, let's say, in the fight or right alongside them, understanding their situation, being adaptable in terms of services or support. Those things are also very, very important. And removing any divisiveness. There's an industry initiative to remove divisive language from technology handbooks and language, even. So black and white lists become block deny lists, right? Or block and allow lists.
Or red and blue teams, like that, right? Purple teams. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that we see it really, cultural aspects and leadership are often seen as soft, but actually probably stronger than even stronger than the technology and the architecture. So those three things have to work together, and we've certainly seen that happening and growing.
So this is such an opportunity for us to go out, to evangelize, to champion, to shift things, to get better solutions. And also the other thing that makes I instantly think is to be that magnet looking for top talent. It's just like, great, if we're out there and being more inclusive in every way. So rather than putting the barriers up, and let's face it, security is now more diverse in terms of its responsibilities and job roles than ever before. It really is. So for me, it's just like, yes, we get greater buy-in from throughout the organization through our messaging and collaboration and inclusiveness and invitations. We get better solutions because they can contribute. And then, by the way, we can also be the advert for, like, why not come and join us? This is the coolest industry to be in. That's kind of how I see it. Lisa, I'll come back to you. Do you see it like that? Do you see that there's an opportunity for something more maybe that I've missed?
There are two things that I'd like to say. The first is that I think diversity is so important for risk, because I think what we often say about diversity is, we're all equal, and we are. However, we've all got different backgrounds, different experiences, different knowledge levels and cultures, all dictate how we view risk, all dictate how we view opportunity. So to use an example, many, many years ago, in the lead up before 9/11 happened, Osama bin Laden was on the radar of the American authorities. And the problem that they had was that they looked at the videos that he put out and they dismissed him as just this random guy in a cave somewhere. He wasn't a threat. He was just a bit, it was a bit extreme and sort of making these videos. However, the people who were looking at the videos were all white male Americans. They were not from Muslim backgrounds. They didn't have knowledge of Islamic principles any more than from their training. And what they missed was that actually the robes that he was wearing, which they thought were just, nothing specific, actually had huge significance and would have made him be seen as a threat, a much greater threat had they brought in somebody with that background. So it just goes to show that actually we all view risk very differently. Men and women view risk differently, different cultures do. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you don't have a diverse team. And if your team all are very similar individuals, you're probably missing a lot of risks and you're probably missing a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely great point. So you are working blindsided. You know, it's just like you got your blinkers on, you might be focused on this, but completely missing a ton of information, a ton of intelligence that is actually going to make us better at reducing risk or bouncing back faster, so being more resilient, because that really is our job, you know, to do both aspects. I'm looking at the time now, and what I want to do is actually go over to you, Francis, you know, my supporter here, who's like managing all the questions from the audience. What have we got coming in?
So interesting enough, one of the first questions was from an individual, Paul Embley, who's from the States. Now, I wanted to bring it in because I think it's quite relevant in terms of some of the trends you were all talking about. So he goes, here in the States, we initially saw users embracing security and being very vigilant. Now we're getting a significant amount of pushback with users, especially internal IT people. So something what Karl was saying about as well, wanting us to relax the requirements. Are you seeing the same trend, and any suggestions on how to keep up the vigilance? So Jane, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm going to throw this to the panel. I'm going to start with Lisa because she's straight in front of me. Lisa, what do you what are you seeing? Because obviously you're going into a lot of firms, assessing the risk and reducing it.
Part of what we do, actually, we go into companies and run crisis simulations. So we test the situation and we test their business continuity plans. And often what we find is that they have beautiful plans, absolutely beautiful. However, when you put the plan to the test, it doesn't work. And something's missing and the communication falls down and there's no backup. And then you throw something in, such as they say, oh, well, Frank will deal with it because Frank he knows everything there is to know about this. And I turn around and I say, well, what happens if Frank's off today?
Yeah.
Frank's on holiday. Now what happens? And they look at me as if to say, well, Frank can't go on holiday ever again. So, you know, the problem is, what I often say to people is, when you practice your plans to test for, you know, like you would with a fire drill, imagine a cyber attack or a data breach happening on the worst day of the year, in the worst situation, when your staff have been hit by flu or the coronavirus, and everyone's off sick, and everything's going wrong, and then see if your plans work. Because if your plans work in that situation, on your best day, they'll be much better.
Yeah, it's almost like I remember going into a very large financial company it was probably a year or two ago, and what they were talking about was actually tackling this by actually having two in a box. You know, it was almost like the Jack in a box. So actually making sure that they had that duplication. And then obviously from an ops perspective, it's just like, great, if you've got that duplicity, then you are not going to allow both to go on holiday at the same time. It's just like, if you've only got two people who know what's what, it's just like one can go on holiday during that period, the other one can't. But often it's things like that. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of, from a policy and paper and documentation perspective, it's all there. They've done their job. They've just not executed it. They've not tested it and done the drills. And I think this is a great failing when it comes to security, because that's typically what I'm seeing. It's just like, where are the drills? Why aren't we approaching it like the fire drills, you know, that go off at 11 o'clock every morning or whatever it is on a Friday? It's just like, these things just don't get done. Who else wants to comment on that? Ayala.
Yeah, I'm really happy to comment. I think it's interesting that people are asking for more flexibility or to relax requirements. I'm unsure what would trigger that, because even if people are returning to working from offices, I think the risk largely remains the same, the way in which it would have increased in the last few months. So at least for us, looking at the threat of inbound malicious emails or impersonations, but on the other side, also people potentially making mistakes with regards to the way that they manage data, that largely translates to wherever people are working and wherever they're sending, I guess, dealing with information. So I think this has been a great opportunity to introduce new processes and continuously encourage that security culture that can hopefully manifest for months to come. But hopefully people don't really feel that regulations are stringent because it becomes part of their day-to-day and subconscious thinking in the way that technology is being incorporated, but also in the way that people maybe now manage contracts or the way in which they send client data to clients themselves or to counterparties, for example.
It's interesting. It's almost as if the spotlight has gone on every single aspect. So people, processes, and technology. And I don't know if the panel are finding this, but it's almost like, say, from a people perspective, if you are not being seen to contribute, then fine, will replace you with either someone who can or a tool. So and then of course we've got artificial intelligence and machine learning and great new tools coming along, which I think, again, from what I'm seeing is, we've had this either reallocation of spending in terms of budget and things like that, to get everyone working remotely and the businesses coping with this new situation. And we've also seen, or I've heard, that CISOs and leaders are actually, partners are looking at this either short term and applying either like a 90-day or 6 month solution to it, and just taking it almost like not on a daily basis, but looking really short term, crisis management really, or otherwise this is an opportunity to look long term. And then they're moving to virtual environments or the cloud and things like that, because it's just like, great, we're not going to go back. This is how it is going to be. There's a total change in how we're working, how we're operating. Mo, you're nodding your head. That
I just wanted to second what Lisa said about the simulations. I think we've seen that as a very important tool for both in terms of what organizations are doing, because they're not just accepting what the technology as it is, right? They really want to simulate the real outcome. And I think that's the big change, is that organizations are thinking, I need to get the outcome, not just to have the control in place, but the outcome might be, is really what I'm after, right? And if it's supposed to detect something, does it really do that in a sort of a real world simulated environment? I might say that correctly. But so simulations are really, really important. And I think process is equally important in that sense, because exercises, yes, but oftentimes we find that organizations don't have a strong process in one way or other, whether it's data protection, security operations, or other things, and they want to buy the silver bullet, let's say, but that's just not possible. It won't work if you don't make the process there to support it.
Karl, what's your view on this pushback?
Really good question. I've seen it many times, and it does come from IT, mainly because of the fact that when a change is made or an implementation, a security implementation is put into place, quite often the front desk will get all the response. If you all of a sudden block USBs or whatever, you're going to get a lot of calls coming in from disgruntled partners and fee earners. Why can't I do that? And it's going to come into the IT department. And that's what you've got to remember, is that you've got to bring them on board with you. And because people will just sometimes, take IT for granted. It's okay. You just flick that switch, disable the use of this, or do this as a security measure. But actually, it's easy for someone like me to say that and to put a policy. But actually, when it comes to enforcing that policy, you've got to make sure that you're getting the right message to the IT service desk, that they know why you're doing this, that they understand how to talk the user through what the process and the problem is and to help the user. Yeah. Because the moment you don't train your IT staff or tell them how to do it properly, they'll just push back, and they'll look for workaround solutions as well. So it's all about, actually, it's not just about telling the business that don't forget IT, because they're the ones that are going to be actually in the coalface of this.
Yeah. So it's more the collaboration and again, like that buy-in and selling it to them why they should. Francis, what other questions?
We've got some more coming in. So someone's asked two. So I'm Narendra, great to have you with us again. So thank you. There's a couple of questions. I'm going to go to a second one because it sort of works around the management issues, which we're just talking about here. He goes, reference one, adaptability. Second part, efficiency. How would you convince senior management that A, is required at times instead of B, especially when they are dogmatic, that i.e. B is the only way? So how do you convince and how do you, I suppose, get the buy-in really from the management of what is required, especially when they're very set in their ways? I think it's quite relevant at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, for me, looking at that is really understanding who you're selling to. So it's just like you've really got to understand them in depth, and you've got to go and build that relationship with them. So the only way that you can do that is by having a conversation and really understanding about, well, what's going on with your job? I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you meet your KPIs, your goals, your aspirations. Talk to me about what your job involves and things like that. So that's always how I would approach it, because then you're going to get a lot of intelligence back. You're going to get lots of signals and clues about what you need to do in order to support them and how to pitch it to them. And then you've got to have your data there. So it's about going and doing that research and presenting it in the language that is right to them. And actually, so for some people it could be that you need the figures. If you're talking to an accountant, someone who's financial, then they're going to want to know about, well, what's it going to do in terms of the numbers, the efficiencies and things like that. So it's understanding who you are selling it to first and building that relationship. And also, again, I think some of the stakeholders around them who are also going to be your champions, like the majority of the panelists, I think, have come from a military background. So you will have so much knowledge, and we have a lot of people in our industry anyway that have come from a forces background, as to how to approach this even as a campaign, almost as a military campaign. Who are the good, those who are on the good side, your allies, and those who are ones to watch out for. So you really need to build the case and know who are your supporters and champions, and who are going to try and take you down or take you out or be the blockers. That's my view on it. What about the panelists? Who wants to go first?
I think there's a real win here. So in terms of getting senior management on board, right, and Lisa will probably know this from her experience in consulting, is that if you go through a business continuity exercise with them, a desktop exercise through the efficiencies that they've got, you'll soon realize they're not adaptable. As you walk through and talk through credible scenarios, you'll sit there and you get the right people in that room, you'll soon realize where your blockers are and where your efficiencies are stopping your adaptability. And that's it. It sounds easy. It's getting them all in the room together to go through it with a credible scenario, step by step. Then you'll have their ear.
Any more questions, Francis?
Yes, we do. I just wanted to ask though, from your perspective, Jane or even Lisa, have you seen any industries which stand out as more, I suppose, dogmatic in their approach? Because I've got my views on legal, but I think ultimately, with people sort of listening, we've got a cross sector here, cross industry. So do you think one's a little bit more?
I haven't. I think it's a great question, and I love to do the research in that, but I haven't. So I think, in terms of companies and so brands and leaders, cultures, again, it comes down to cultures, doesn't it? It's just like, what is the culture of that company? What is the culture of the brand? Is it kind of living the values and the culture of the company, or is it just all marketing stuff? But really, for me, I don't think that research has been done yet, and it would be fascinating to see if there were any trends with it. So it really is about looking for the signals within those companies, so that if you're putting yourself into a company like that, say you're going for a role or something like that, that you're in the right place in terms of that environment, the right environment that's a match for you. What about you, Lisa? Have you seen?
I've seen some industries that I would say, certainly from, just going back to the business continuity point that Karl said, I actually think the maritime industry is on top of their game on this. situation. And the reason, and people often criticize the maritime industry, but in terms of preparedness, I actually think that they are leaders because they're so used to things like, for example, ports have the ISPS code. They have to exercise, they have to practice what would happen if they had security breaches and so on and so forth. And I actually think the maritime industry are quite used to contingency planning in a way that a lot of us haven't been, and hopefully this virus will teach us that contingency planning is king, because anything could happen.
Really interesting that. I mean, we've had 2 high-profile attacks, you know, that we've spoken about. Knowles Hydro? It was Knowles Hydro, wasn't it? You know, that we spoke about, Knowles Hydro and Maersk. You know, so it's like really interesting that you say that.
We've got another question. We're conscious of time as well. So this is from Ross Pierce. So about many CISOs are reporting that the pandemic has often led to cybersecurity budgets going up. However, overall IT transformation budgets are being restricted. This can lead to band-aid security solutions rather than IT transformation being the real cyber catalyst. How can we make sure this message lands?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I work with a variety of firms, and some of them will come to Tessian as a result of potential contingency planning for the future, not necessarily having faced a data breach in the moment. And that's really interesting and great to see the security teams being proactive. It can then be challenging to secure that budget from management when they haven't necessarily faced that breach yet. So they haven't necessarily felt the pain of the financial loss that comes as a result of it. It's then quite difficult to translate certain breaches into that financial figure to justify spend. So it is a challenge that we see on our side as well. However, I think, truly evangelistical and future thinking security teams are able, I think, to translate the risk into potential financial figures, which always resonate with the management team. And we've often seen that bringing, for example, the managing partner or the head of risk and compliance into those conversations and showing them potential simulations of what could happen.
Yeah.
Company in future really opens up those conversations.
And again, coming back to the point that I made, that's so good. When you know them, when you know the stakeholders who you're selling to, it's just like, well, fine, you can actually position it in the correct way. But what I also I want to find out from Mo, if you're seeing this too, is what I'm always calling for is actually for companies to make this easier for the companies that they're selling to, so that they do that legwork. Because I know you're nodding your head, Karl. Yeah. You know, it's just like you've got to then sell it on, you know, within the farm. So it's just like, why are we not seeing more help? You know, and I just don't see this. So this is something that I'm always calling out for. Do a thorough job, make it as easy as possible, so that can be sold within the farm. You know, help the leader out.
Yeah, I was going to say on the specifics of the question there, I think one way to avoid that also is to have that collaboration going on between the architecture team, security architecture team, and IT. If that's an existing motion or existing relationship, maybe those silos won't happen, right? They can get built in a little quicker. But I absolutely agree with making it easier. It goes back to that self-service culture, and especially with the rapid adoption of cloud services. So that's one area where the IT budgets probably have been increased to adopt cloud-based services. You're getting security into that process is it can be easier, right? But you need a service or we could make it easier, put it that way, with a service or what have you, as an industry, that is, right? To make sure that the process gets built, not just the technology is bought, but a process gets built and there's training to go along with that. I think that's the rounding out the whole thing.
And it's presenting the two solutions, isn't it? It's just like, here's your comparison table. This is what happens when you go with the longer term, transformation solution, and this is what happens when you cut corners. So, and looking at the risks that fall out from it. So I think that's, it comes down to, again, working with the company that you are potentially going to be engaging to present that.
We do have one more, and that was about DocuSign. And this is if anyone's got any sort of, I think, more examples actually with regards to DocuSign. So are there any situations where organizations refuse DocuSign as they only want hard copy signature by post?
I'm probably not the best person to answer it because our DocuSign is still going through the final phases. Yeah, we are moving to it. But we're seeing a demand for it, right? So that's from our side. That's why we've moved to it. Yes, we're seeing a demand to it. I guess there's probably still going to be organizations out there that will insist on a wet signature, depending on the type of, transaction or contract. So, I wish I could answer it any better with some actual examples of it. But like I say, we're rolling it in. But the reason we're rolling it in because there's an increased demand, and that's because we're just moving to a more digitized kind of platform.
I think that will happen. I mean, I'm certainly aware of property. So I think property is still, simply because I've got friends who are property developers. So it's just like, can you sign? They need a hard copy. So there's that reluctance. So, but I think, in terms of, it's not I think, I know, in terms of what's going to happen is this just fast forwards everything, so it's just like, this is the way we know it's, that change is coming. So it's only a matter of time, which is a good thing, I think, because this we've been waiting for this for ages.
I do know family law and wills and also commercial property, what you said. So if you look at family law, there's a lot of situations where it's still wet signature is required by them. Wills have only just changed over. I think that was in the press quite a lot as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, doing a will and, they've had to use Zoom. So Zoom, they're now able to witness live.
Yes.
So, those are examples. I don't know if anyone has any others in sort of different industries, but those are the ones I'm aware of from the legal side.
Great. So I think that is all we've got time for today. I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank Mo and Lisa and Ayala and Karl, Francis and the team for putting this on for everyone. We've still got loads and loads of people who are still watching and have tuned in. So I just want to thank you as well for turning up to listen in and also to ask such great questions, because you've made this, an absolute success. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us and for tuning in today.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. And I really, and there's a thank you from Paul Embley to the panel there. So great, thank you, Paul. I just want to thank you all for joining me. And I always enjoy sort of these kind of discussions, because you get sort of different insights. I can be quite siloed when it comes to the legal community. So and I look forward to working with you all again. And thank you, Jane. Your moderation is wonderful. So thank you for joining us. And here's the next one next week.